She was this gun-toting, whiskey-drinking broad.
The super epic fucking broad.
She was a pioneer in the industry.
She's also so famous and so controversial.
So controversial.
So she's kind of a big fucking deal.
Her story is so incredible. She belongs on this podcast because she's a broad you should know. Hello and welcome to Broads You Should Know, the podcast about amazing and noteworthy women from history. I am your host, Sara Gorski, and I am here today continuing our extra revenge celebration of Black History Month and DEI, because we're doubling down on our DEI on this podcast since the government doesn't want us to. It's my favorite thing to do, to be contrary to the assholes who are trying to ruin everything. So today I am continuing to talk about one of the pioneers in early childhood education. Her name is Dr. Evelyn Moore. She is still around today, and she has had a remarkable impact on the way we understand early childhood education and its potential impact for the entirety of people's lives. Interestingly enough, Evelyn Moore, if you're listening to this, there's not a lot about your personal life on the Googling that I did, in the searching that I did. So I don't have a lot of, personal details about her life. But the impact of her work speaks for itself, so we're just going to focus on that this episode. But Dr. Evelyn Moore is the founder and executive director for 38 years of the National Black Child Development Institute, which is also called the NBCDI is the acronym. And she has dedicated her entire career to advocating for the well-being and success of Black children and families. She no longer is the director, by the way. She was director for 38 years, and she's since passed the torch, as you do when you become of retirement age and you work so hard your whole life. So we'll talk a little bit about the legacy of the NBCDI as well. But let's go back to the beginning and kind of Evelyn's foundation of work before she started that organization. She grew up in Michigan, and she grew up in a low-income family, a low-income household. She had a mom and a dad, but they didn't have a lot of money growing up. And she went into early education and teaching, I think, pretty directly. She was always interested in that. And she, in particular, went into special education. She was teaching special ed kids in her home state of Michigan. And as she was teaching more and more in these classrooms, she started to notice that there was a huge amount of Black children in special ed classrooms. And she thought to herself, that's kind of weird, because the imbalance was so great, and she was curious about it, and this kind of became the foundation for all of the work that would come after that. So she said that, quote, "When I first came along as a teacher in the 60s, there were so many Black kids in special ed classes, and I thought, this doesn't seem logical." And then she hears about this research project that's getting started up, and it's called the Perry Preschool Project. And if you Google that, you'll find that everywhere. It is like a huge foundational thing for a lot that we know today about early education and the impact of early education. But she hears about this research project, and this project is going to be happening in Ypsilanti, Michigan. Ypsilanti, it's with a Y, by the way, if you don't know how to pronounce it, it's Ypsilanti. At the time, it was certainly one of the most low-income areas in the country. Lots of really poor and disadvantaged folks in that area. And so they put this research project in Ypsilanti. And they basically, it was a project designed to deliver very high quality early education to 3 and 4 year old Black children who were coming from low income households and who had low IQ scores and who were considered high risk for failure at school. Quote, "They needed special education teachers, and when they asked me if I wanted to join the project, I jumped at the chance." So in 1962, Evelyn becomes the youngest of 4 founding teachers for the Perry Preschool Project. This was a highly experimental program that had never, ever been done before. And basically, instead of these children who previously would have been put into, public school classrooms and special ed classes, instead they have all of these really brilliant professional teachers who are highly trained in working with children in such circumstances. And so they were able to kind of put together their own kind of curriculum and work with these children. And Evelyn says, quote, "We didn't have a set curriculum at the start because we understood that learning could take place without making children sit down in rows and putting them through all sorts of drills. Instead, we did all kinds of experiments. We baked with the children so they could learn textures and shapes. We made Jell-O so they could watch the liquid turning into a solid. And all this got them really ready to engage in abstract thinking." She also said, quote, "You can teach children by how you set up the block area and the doll corner. We planned a lot, so there was intentional thinking, but it wasn't the drilling type of teaching. Instead, the children learned through active engagement." And teaching like this poses a greater challenge than when you have a worksheet that tells you what to do from day one. Perry gave us a chance to be creative in the classroom. And in addition to the more creative approach to learning, the Perry Preschool program also included having the teachers make weekly home visits with the kids and their families. Quote, "These home visits are hardly discussed when Perry is written up, but I think they were a very important part of the program. During these visits, teachers and parents developed relationships and parents became more engaged in teaching their children. We were even able to take parents and children on field trips in our cars to further enrich their lives." And through this, the Perry Preschool program teachers were able to develop one-on-one bonds with the children and parents. And they had 3 teachers for a classroom of 25, which usually there was just one teacher, right? And all of these teachers, as I've already said, were very experienced professional teachers. And Evelyn says it's especially crucial for children whose families have fewer resources to give them enriching experiences. I think these are precisely the students who deserve master teachers. If we want to give these children the advantage they need, we have to give them the best. And so through the Perry Preschool Project, they did all of this learning with all of these children. And what they found was that the children's IQs went up significantly in those early years. They did find out that the IQ evened out with their peers a little bit later as they got older, but in this initial learning process, kids, for lack of in layman's terms, kids got smarter when they were giving this attention and this one-on-one bonding that they had. So in addition to the actual IQ measurements, which they saw a huge jump in, the researchers on the Perry Preschool Project also looked at the children's longer-term success in terms of their high school graduation rates, their job retention, their ability to form stable households, and their physical health. And over time, these Perry preschoolers that they worked with did better in all of those measurements than a randomly selected group of their peers who weren't a part of that program. And the Perry Preschool Project to this day stands as a huge milestone in anti-bias early education. And ultimately, there's a lot of work that has spun off out of this as well. But the thing that they really discovered, there's a great quote from Evelyn that says, quote, "We need to give kids a chance to develop before we decide what their limitations are. Many children are very talented, can express themselves well, and know how to make good decisions, but we don't realize what they can do because they have behavioral issues, or they don't test well, or they're simply late bloomers. And we don't have enough patience for children like this. So we place them in special education classes. And by doing that, we limit their chances of future success." Quote, "There's a tendency to label children, and once they get a negative label, it follows them the rest of their lives." And Evelyn would continue to find out through all of her teaching that Black children in particular were very unfairly labeled and quickly labeled slow learners, and they weren't given a chance in school before they were put into special programs. And so the work, the Perry Preschool Project, kind of proved that that better education is going to improve children who may have other challenges due to the circumstance that they are growing up in, right? Into being more low income in challenging areas. She would go on to become Evelyn would go on to become a huge advocate for Black children themselves. She would move to Washington, D.C., and this is in the 1970s when she was helping to, she did two major things. She started the NBCDI, obviously, which was huge. The other major accomplishment in early education that she was a part of was helping to develop the Child Development Associate credential. Quote, I was involved with it from the beginning, and it was part of the discussion that led it to include academic coursework and allowed CDA students to earn college credits. My fight was as much for the educators as for the children, because you have more portability and opportunity if you're a credentialed teacher, end quote. So creating that CDA credential helped establish teachers and give teachers more credit and improve the education of teachers and help them to be more mobile and be able to go out to other places and make a bigger difference in the lives of their students, right? She before she went to Washington, D.C., she would go to Washington, D.C. I skipped over. She also did do, she led some early education teacher training up in Michigan in the area of Willow Run, which also was one of the lowest income neighborhoods in the nation. Quote, it had been a thriving place during World War II when it had been the site of a bomber plane plant that provided thousands of people with jobs. When the war ended, the plant closed and left people without much opportunity or hope for the future. And when President Johnson declared the war on poverty, one of the projects he funded was a child care center in Willow Run. And as the center's director, I used the lessons I'd learned from Perry to train educators so they can help the communities, families, and children. And then in 1971, she goes to Washington, D.C., and that is when she develops the National Black Child Development Institute. From its very inception, the NBCDI's focus has been on achieving positive outcomes for vulnerable children who suffer from the dual legacies of poverty and racial discrimination. This, of course, is the time period in the wake of the Civil Rights Movement, and the inequality and the decks being stacked against Black children were more in the public spotlight than ever. And so the NBCDI was formed as an advocacy group for young Black children, and kind of unified the movement. Under her leadership, during her 38 years in that role, she advocated for universal child care and a wide range of laws affecting child welfare, child care and health, adoption, and education. And the advocacy that she led eventually leads to programs that include technical assistance for curriculum development, federal funding of child development programs in 45 Black colleges, a recruitment program to provide foster homes for Black children, parental services and testing programs that led to the mainstreaming of cognitively challenged students. And 4 years after its initial founding, the NBCDI also launched a national affiliate network. So this organization now has volunteers and organizations in over 20 communities across the United States, with hundreds and hundreds of volunteers at a very grassroots level. And during this period of time when she was in Washington, she testified a lot in front of Congress on behalf of the children to get to establish legislature to lead to better lives for all these kids. Quote, I testified before Congress on practically every child development bill in the 70s because I've always known we need government involvement and we need government representatives who value education for all people equally. And programs like Perry have helped by showing the benefits young children get when you give them a chance to develop. Recent findings of brain science have also made a difference by proving how much learning goes before the age of 5. And this has contributed to better understanding in this country of how important these early years are for children. One of the major tenets of the work that Evelyn did is, quote, education from the early years on is the key to a good life. And she says it's been a long struggle to get where we are in the early childhood field, but we've shown that we have the will to keep changing things for the better. Her work has just been astounding and incredible, and I don't know, I felt like I was going to have something profound to add to that. I think her work speaks for itself, and the important work that they are doing at the NBCDI, which now, by the way, this is the work, like this is part of the work that Head Start and Early Head Start are contributing to, and giving children equal opportunity to education and to quality education, right? And this is the kind of work that's being threatened by the current administration to lose their funding. And more than ever, we need to look back at these researchers and these scientists who've done these studies and who are telling us that kid might not be stupid, they just need a better chance, right? So Dr. Evelyn Moore, this is my toast and thanks to you for all the work that you have done for Black children everywhere in this country, and continue to do. She continues to advocate. She's very active, even though she's retired. She still talks a lot. I am going to post a video interview of her on the website, and also you could find it on YouTube if you just Google Dr. Evelyn Moore. She just talks really profoundly about the needs of children and the importance of early childhood education and the work that teachers do. She's a huge advocate for the teachers as well. So that, my friends, is Dr. Evelyn Moore. Certainly one of the Black History Month queens that we are celebrating today. And always thank you, Dr. Evelyn Moore, for all of the work that you have done for children and families in the United States and around the world. To learn more about Dr. Evelyn Moore, see quotes from this episode and some pictures of her, head on over to broadsyoushouldknow.com. While you're there, click on over to the About page to read more about me. My bio, photo, links to all my stuff, all right there. Are you following Broads You Should Know on social? We are on Facebook and Instagram, and especially YouTube at Broads You Should Know. And Twitter, I'm still there at BYSK Podcast. If you are a fan of this podcast, spread the word about us. Share an episode with your friends or family, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That actually does help new listeners to find us. To suggest a broad, fill out the form on our website or email us at broadsyoushouldknow@gmail.com. Broads You Should Know is produced and edited by me, Sara, with original music by Darren Callahan. Finally, if you really enjoyed hearing more about Dr. Evelyn Moore and all of the amazing work in early education she has done, I highly recommend you check out a few of our previous broads that we've covered, especially last week's broad, a shining star in early education, Marion Wright Edelman. We also have Mary McLeod Bethune, who made big waves for Black education back in the Civil Rights Movement. Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman to run for President of the United States. And also, the biggest education advocate we have ever covered on this podcast is certainly Malala. We'll see you next week for another Broad You Should Know.